Thank you for that. I'm trying to, they're recording this, so just want to make sure can you hear? We're good. Well, thank you all for coming. This is an unusual assignment. The prompt I was given were sort of two related questions. I guess that's been the prompt given to the speakers all year, which is, what's the one book, person, or question that has changed your life? Or the other prompt is, what's one big question you're trying to answer? And so my temptation was actually to do something really academic. But the truth is, there is actually a question that has changed or has driven my life personally, and I thought I would talk about that question and how it emerged in my life, what it did, and how it actually has led quite literally to me sitting here on this campus. Let me tell you how I grew up. I grew up on the Jersey Shore. I was a good Irish Catholic boy, the youngest of a large family, and desperate to please. I was a pleaser. I'm looking at other Catholics in the room who know exactly what I'm talking about. And when I look back at my life for most of growing up, I was kind of frantic and manic in my need to please people. It could have been a product of just good old Catholic intensity, but maybe I was struggling with my sexuality as a young boy. But basically, I coded my life as a series of what's the next gold medal to get, what's the next blue ribbon to get. And my brother was on a swim team, I was going to be on a swim team. If this is the best high school, I was going to try to get to the best high school. And if anyone looked at how my life was ticking along through high school and college, it would have looked remarkably good, in the sense of went off to a very fine college, not as fine of a college as this, but a very good. I went to Notre Dame, and where I was on the swim team, and I was desperate to become captain of the swim team. And but a series of decisions were made along the way, and the first big one was choosing my major. I majored in economics because I thought that would make my dad remarkably happy. Econ is what makes dads happy. Turns out I got that completely wrong when I've actually asked him about it. But I picked this major. I was sort of underground philosophy major because that was what I really wanted to study. But I was studying economics. And when I was in college, when you're majoring, and I thought it was a big revolution in my life in that I didn't enter the College of Business, which was what one ought to do. I was in the College of Arts and Sciences, which was away from that. And there I was, kind of moving along. I didn't know what to do with that. And so I learned early on, it was almost like a card trick, that if you just say to people, well, I'm going to law school, the immediate social approval you get from your parents and from society to say, I'm going to law school, it's really quite dramatic why our culture so prizes a type of professional degree. But I remember the first time I said out loud, I'm going to law school, just the wave of comfort that provided me. And then I ended up applying to law schools, got into some good ones, went to a good one. This was the 1980s when Wall Street was starting to really heat up, and the Wall Street law firms were really starting to pay associates a ton of money. This was the beginning of the junk bond craze, big corporate finance. And so by a set of circumstances, I ended up working for a law firm called Davis Polk & Wardwell, which no one in this room would ever know, but it's by almost every measure one of the world's great law firms. And so there I was, quite literally a Wall Street lawyer. My firm's address was 1 Wall Street. And I remember thinking, it's so perfect, and there I was, and I remember thinking, I got to go into high finance, go into banking. At this time in American culture, Wall Street finance was very, very culturally prized. And there I was, not kind of in the center of it. I was actually right in the white heart center of that thing. And I remember thinking, I absolutely hate this. I remember thinking, was there a day in law school they explained why this was important, and I was absent that day. But I just was, I remember having, for the first time in my life, a life that was so kind of animated by an energetic pursuit of approval that it was the very first time in my life I experienced what can only be described as a type of existential dread. I mean, really, like this type of dread that actually was manifesting itself and I actually thought I was dying. I remember the sense of, I think I'm dying. It just was so palpable. And why does this lead to this question? One of the most important moments of my life happened one night when I was coming home from work. Wall Street is at the very tip of Manhattan, but I was living on the Upper West Side. So you could take subways, take the train down from Wall Street, take the subway up to the Upper West Side. You could get cars to bring you back and forth and charge it to your client. But I remember thinking, I love the city, I'll take the subways. But I was on the subway fairly late at night. This is the 80s. This is before the subways were really transformed. They were fairly violent places well into the 80s in Manhattan. And people said, don't go on the subways. But it was just the easiest way to get home. And I was on the West 72nd Street subway platform, going from the express to the local. I just remember, and I'm standing there late at night, a little tense because it was very late, and you're kind of alone on a subway platform. And I heard, and I thought, oh my God, a gun has just gone off. Not an uncommon circumstance at that time, but here I am on a subway platform, a gun has just gone off. And I turned around, because I was waiting for the train, so I turned around on the platform, and it turns out there was a young woman who'd just gone grocery shopping. It had been raining out. She had a brown paper bag. The bag had gotten wet, and a glass bottle that she had bought had simply fallen out of a wet bag and shattered on the platform of the subway. And that's what had produced what sounded remarkably like, or what I thought was a gunshot. The very first thought that occurred to me after that moment was, after it's not a gun, the next thought was, oh, I wish I had been shot. Because I remember thinking, if you get shot, surely you can take a few weeks off from work, right? and no, I had this, it was as clear as a bell, and I'm thinking, I remember going, I wonder what the firm's policy is on, being shot, and it was like, I remember it was like sort of like I thought, like you get shot in Hollywood movies, kind of, not the face, just kind of, like blood seeping through your suit jacket, like go on without me, and I sat there and I'm like, and then of course the next obvious thing to think about is, you are willing to get shot not to go to work. You might not be where you ought to be. Right? And I was like, oh dear God, this is true. So I remember thinking, it really, I don't know why that event hit me so kind of deeply in my cortex, but it did. And I remember thinking, well, you've completely messed up your life. Like, you are in the wrong place. I'm 27 at the time. I thought it's over for me. But, and I realized clearly how I'd constructed my life, the questions I was asking myself had brought me to this place. So then I sat down and I said, I need a fresh start. And I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a year off. And I remember just sitting down back at my apartment over the next couple nights, and I said, exactly how could I give myself a year off? I had been living my life up to that point. I was making a very good salary on Wall Street. Every dollar in I was spending. I had a really beautiful apartment overlooking Central Park. I had an expensive car in the city. I was taking trips everywhere. So every dollar in was going out. And I said, I've got to radically deaccession my life, and I got to radically change my financial situation. Looking back, I recognize the level of privilege that's involved in my ability to make these decisions is very, very true. But I sat down and I said, this is the amount I need to buy myself 1 year. And I got it. I I moved to Brooklyn before Brooklyn was cool. You know, I deaccessioned a number of my friends who were making me spend these monies this way. And the payday in which I crossed the line in the amount I thought I needed for one day, I walked down the hall into John Ettinger's office. He was the managing partner, and I quit. And he was very surprised because I didn't look like the sort of person who was experiencing existential dread and quitting. I mean, I tend to affect the type of geniality, but I was like, I'm leaving, John. Now, one thing about law firms is when you quit, you actually leave immediately. Like you're escorted out of a building with security because they want to get you away from all the sensitive information that sits on most people's desks. So I'm quitting. And he says, well, can you stand outside? 2 security cards came. You get a box, you go to your office, and you leave. So I remember leaving. I remember just like, oh my God, my whole life has led to this firm and this moment, and I got a box, and I'm walking out of this building. And here was the year. I was going to give myself a year. And I because I had secretly majored in philosophy in addition to economics, I'd given myself all these, I was going to read all of Emerson. That was my project. Don't do that. It's really, you're not going to do it. It's really, and then I read a lot of very dark poets. If you were Sylvia Plath, Edna St. Vincent Millay, if you were a suicidal lesbian poet, I read you that year. I was I would just be like I was jonesing for another poet and it was very dark. But the project wasn't going well. I could tell that. I was living actually in an abandoned hotel in Cape May, New Jersey. A friend of mine was a developer of hotels, and he was developing this project. I needed a place to crash. I had a dog, and we just moved to this hotel. And I realized I was just falling into, it was Congress Hall. You go to Cape May, you're like, what hotel? And it was Curtis Bashaw. Curtis Bashaw. He was developing the project, but I was living literally in this huge abandoned hotel in this winter, and I realized I was falling. Actually, I was not. This project didn't seem constructive. It seemed quite despairing. And I remember I called up my older sister and said, who lived in Los Angeles, and I said, I got to come see you. Anyway, I realized I left a big important piece of this out. The project I gave myself, the question I wanted to answer during this year was, what's the one thing that's true about me? Like, I remember I don't know where I came up with the question. It is Emersonian in a certain way, but I remember thinking, because I'd lived my life answering other people's notions of me, if I inverted the question and just said, what's the one thing that's irrefutably true about me, that would surely bring me to a better place. That was the question. And it wasn't going well. This is several months into it. It was the dead of winter, and I called my sister in Los Angeles, and I said, Lynn, I'm in a bad place. Let me come visit you in Los Angeles. If you have an older sister, if you're I don't know if it works with sisters to sisters, but if you're a boy with an older sister, I think it's like a rule that older sisters must feed you. Like, I think it's like I remember just saying, I'm coming to your house and I'm staying. I couldn't have done it with my brother. He'd be like, what are you doing? But my sister's like, get in the house, and I knew she'd feed me. And so I flew to Los Angeles. I sat in her house. I remember landing. I got into her house. We woke up the next morning, and she said, Brian, what do you want to do today? And I said, let's go to UCLA. My sister lived right near UCLA. And I said, let's go to UCLA. And she goes, you always want to be on campuses. And I was like, oh my God. Like, that's the answer? When she said it, and she said it in such a clear way, Brian, you always want to be on campuses. And when I'd entered this project, I remember thinking the answer to this question was going to be, I must give my life in service to God, or I must, I remember imagining that the answer to the question was going to be something kind of more categorical, something more profound. And instead it was irrefutably true. I'm happy on campuses, I'm less happy off of them. And I brought some props. just 2 books. When I was a junior at Notre Dame, Henry Rosofsky, who was the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard, wrote a book called The University, an Owner's Manual. I walked by as a junior and I saw this book and I said, oh my God, I've got to get that book, right? Like surely every 19-year-old in the world wants to read an owner's manual to universities, because I was like, oh, thank God, it's been written at last. And then Elizabeth Trimble, my classmate at Stanford in law school, as a graduation present, she gave me this book called Campus. It's a history of American campus architecture. And she said, I saw this book, and of course I had to give it to you. And I'm like, oh, thank you. So my point about this is there were so many obvious clues all along that I was blatantly ignoring. But what was interesting about that moment, again, I remember thinking, I resisted it. I thought I needed a more profound answer than this notion that I belonged on a campus. I couldn't get out of my head. I'm like, this, it turns out, is the one irrefutably true thing about me. And I remember sitting down and said, well, here I am. I have no money. I have a dog. I'm in my sister's house. I've got to get myself to a campus. To the faculty in here, I'm about to say something that's going to horrify them. But this is the level of sophistication I brought to my next step, which was, well, people on campuses have PhDs. I should get one of those. Like literally, that's the level of sophistication I brought to. And so I'm like, I better get one of those. And then I thought, well, what should I get it in? And I remember thinking, I like reading history. I just do. I should get a PhD in that. And I did, and I got accepted to graduate school. And I'm sitting here. I should just say, everything from that moment, and there's been really hard moments in this part, and there's been incredibly hard chapters of this, and there's been a lot of lows, and there's been a lot of great highs, but it turns out that was the answer to that question, and you can do all you want to ignore that question, but if somehow your sister sits down over a breakfast table in Los Angeles and tells you what your calling is, that's your calling, and you do well by answering it. And I often have thought about why that was the question. You know, what's the one thing that's true about you? Because it's awfully solipsistic. It's very self-referential. Again, it is very Emersonian, but you can invert it, and it has a universality. It's who am I? It's essentially who am I? And that has been my life ever since that particular moment. And I went off and got a PhD and went off and did a whole bunch of things. And then, well, I could just say about a year and a half ago, Colgate University called me, and I'm here because of that. But I'm here because I almost want to get shot on a subway station. So I didn't know whether that was sort of what you would expect from a heretic conversation, but if you ever really want to understand me, I'm endlessly trying to answer that question. And what's really interesting it's interesting to me, maybe it's not interesting to you, but I ended up writing my dissertation on the emotionality around colleges and universities. I'm essentially trying to answer the question, why do these places have this particular pull on us and me particularly? I think everyone's research at some level is a doorway into their soul. Most scholarly work is autobiographical at some deep level, and so I'm still trying to answer the question, why is it that these places have this particular emotional pull on me personally? But it remains true to this day that I don't know why I belong on a campus. So that is my talk. And I've never given a biographical personal talk before, so I'm a little bit freaked out about that. I could do a scholarly talk like that and be perfectly fine and walk out. So anyway, I don't know if that lends itself to questions or comments or thoughts or reactions, but what are your questions, comments, concerns? Did I get it wrong? So yes, Rebecca.
Question about, so do you, well, it's sort of a question. So, is there something about your experience of kind of finding your calling that you feel like would be more universally applicable or would be helpful for students who are themselves struggling with that kind of, that struggle? And would there have been any virtue in you finding it in a more efficient way?
Yes. Law school cost a lot of money.
That's sort of a second question about, like, how do you feel about the fact that it was a kind of indirect path, and do you feel like there was something of value in that rather than?
Let me answer the second part and then go to the first part. I do not regret a single moment of all the steps that preceded breakfast with my sister in Los Angeles. I don't regret a second of law school. I don't regret a second of working on Wall Street. Hey, I learned about Wall Street. I often think, and I said this to the first years at Convocation, put as many things in your backpack as you never know when you're going to need to open up your backpack and pull something out. There's not a day that I'm not a lawyer. So I don't regret the indirection of it at all. And I could imagine that my life might have another change. I've learned to accept that. But back to that question and that moment of discovery, when I think, why am I happy on campuses? What I most remember about college, and again, this was sort of an important moment in my opening address, was I remember very quiet moments when I could read, and very quiet moments. I remember thinking in the 80s that we didn't have a lot of solitude. I really, really, really worry about young people today. I've now become old, right? Kids today. You guys, there's no solitude. Your phones, there's no solitude. But what I remember about college was these moments of, I remember the work of college was this endless reading and studying and figuring myself out. So maybe this is a way to answer your question, is there is value in understanding those places in which you feel like what you're engaged in is meaningful. I feel my way through spaces. I can walk into certain spaces and think, this space is not a good space, or this is not a space for me to do my work. But most beautiful campuses, and I by the way, I do think there's importance in beauty. I think beauty is important. I will never deviate from that. I think, for me, I remember thinking the work engaged on a campus made me feel positive. I feel that way about certain other things, but I can walk on a campus and I can feel people thinking, and I say to myself, there's something about this that speaks to my soul. Other people feel that. My uncle, I know it's his wood shop. I know that about him. He's also a lawyer, but there's just, my uncle seems my most Uncle Bill-ness when he is in his wood shop, and that's his place. But my place happens to be a campus. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't know.
What role did your spirituality play in, like, figuring yourself out after high school, college, a little weird?
It's really interesting that you asked that, because having gone to Notre Dame.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, what role do you think your spirituality has played in the answering of that question, maybe even the shaping of the question, and what is it doing now? I don't know. But I know I got to answer that, because having gone to an institution in which religiosity, I'm not going to say spirituality, was so, when you go to Notre Dame, there's little doubt you're on a Catholic campus, right? There's a dome and Mary's on the top, and and there's a grotto and there's chapels. And so I often wonder, when I think about that space, my first real encounter with a campus was infused with religiosity. I was also at Notre Dame at a time when the faculty there was very engaged in their own lives and the teaching of liberation theology, which is really lost its place in Catholic thought, and a real loss. There was a notion, there was a real movement that one engaged in the world, and it had I think its most powerful expression in South America. A lot of American religious went down to South America and said, we are called by Christ to help people understand that liberation comes through their engagement with Christ, and vice versa, the Catholic Church must be informed by this work. So when I was at Notre Dame, and we had to take 4 courses in theology, and I remember I didn't know it at the time, but I was reading a lot about this, and so that is actually the question. I have been riding the I'm a lapsed Catholic for 25 years, and I need to resolve that. But we read, I don't know if people still read Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain. Is that still, it's the best book in the world. Dorothy Day, The Long Loneliness. Does that read, come on, this is killing me.
I'm working on it.
Right, they're fabulous books. I mean, they're books of spiritual journeys and people going through dark periods, and they are remarkable books. And Dorothy Day gets involved in labor movements in the Lower East Side, and she understands that as being deeply connected to her religious life. And so, but you're right, and I haven't answered that yet. So maybe that's the second question. But yeah,
I find it somewhat ironic that you mentioned Emerson as a big influence, yet in the end you ended up clinging to some sort of institution. And can you maybe expand on how institutionalization and how you thought of institutions affected your decisions, and why maybe like Wall Street as an institution was so unsatisfying for you, but like a college campus is different?
You know, the institutions of higher education and the the system of American higher education, I both studied it and I live it. And you do spend a lot of your time thinking about what animated the founding of these institutions, what their purpose is, how they have fallen short, how their original construction might still be informing what's happening today. I think there's a significant renegotiation about what a campus is right now in American culture, which I think is remarkably healthy. And also there's been other periods just like this. Maybe that's why I never finished Emerson. Maybe I am not an individualist, and the great I of the existentialists and the early, the American Renaissance isn't as important to me ultimately as the community of learning, the community of scholars. The great work, let's just take from the faculty perspective, the way you have to understand all of your faculty is that they are very much enmeshed in their disciplines, and they are endlessly sending out work and receiving work. They are very much in a community of scholars. If you look at, Alan works at Colgate, but Alan also is very much part of your scholarly community. You understand maybe you're not. He's a bitter, broken man rejected by the Academy. For me, and particularly this is personal to me, having come off an inauguration, which is a moment for an institution to gather itself up, I'm always happy when people are together. Like when I think of great moments is on campuses or when people are kind of gathered. I love my old job. I could look out on the main quad, and there's always this moment when the students all cross. One thing I really regret about my office right now is it feels 200 yards removed from where everything is, and I miss walking out and getting a cup of coffee and seeing students. So maybe I am learning that I'm much more of a community person than an individualist, but who's still looking for the answer to, I don't know, maybe we find God in community. Yes, bitter, broken man.
Which are your favorite campuses and why?
No, I have. It's hard to separate them out from specific. But if I had to pick my favorite campus, probably Wellesley. Do people know Wellesley's campus? It's in Wellesley, Massachusetts, women's college. It's one of the, it was Frederick Law Olmsted actually set the campus. Very much a naturalistic campus and its curving paths. It's in one of the most beautiful sites ever. Rolling hills, Gothic towers. I think it's the most romantic place in the world. Wasn't there a movie with?
Julia Roberts?
Yeah, Julie Roberts. Yeah, it's filmed on that. Yeah, I think campuses have distinct personality. When you go to Stanford's campus, you can feel the hum of ambition, and I like Yale because it's brooding. I like this campus. I think everyone says this campus is beautiful. I think it could be more beautiful. It doesn't. No, it doesn't gather. It's a little too leaky. It's too leaky. You guys get scattered too much. You guys. This is a campus that's had a number of difficult conversations. Those conversations would have been helped if people knew each other better because they see each other. And when I think about this campus, I keep thinking, how do I get the leakiness fixed? Seriously, it's just, the more you run into each other, the better your education will be. That is one of the central tenets of a residential liberal arts college. You're supposed to run into each other, and you're supposed to have friction with each other. And the fact that this is a very suburban campus. You come to work and then you go home. That's a very 1960s urban planning model. I want to mess it up a bit, but make it beautiful. Yes, Rebecca.
I'm just going to add that when Rebecca Chop was doing her goodbyes at her last faculty meeting, and she was asked to sort of share what is the one thing you would want to say. The one thing she said was that her biggest concern about Colgate is the way that by junior year people were dispersed and were essentially off campus, and the negative impact of that on campus culture. So I'm just affirming.
I will have to say when I knew I was going to take this job, I called Rebecca, and I've had a number of. I didn't know she had said that, but I'm pleased by that because I admire her greatly. The fact that we came to that.
Yeah, that really stuck with me. That comment.
Junior year is such an important pivot moment when you really are kind of aiming your way. The fact that you do this not in front of each other is really a loss to this community. The fact, from a campus plan standpoint, the chapel is perfectly situated. The very fact that you are all in a basement, there's architectural reasons in addition to spiritual reasons, but this is a crossroads. And the fact that paths go down, it turns out this is probably the most important building on the campus, not for spiritual reasons, but for architectural reasons. Not just because there's a steeple, but it's the one place everyone crosses every day, and I think that's incredibly important. The library it's like 40 yards off. It's like I just want to move it up the hill, just right, just like, and I want to anyway. So anyway, more thoughts, questions. I'm glad to answer anything else about my life. Anyway. Yeah, Mark.
When you were telling your story, I was reminded of my first day at Berklee College of Music.
Oh, yeah.
I was sitting next to a 45-year-old man, and in Harmony 2 class, right? So basic level. And I looked at him, and I said, "You're not 18 years old."
Yeah.
And he said, "I was a senior partner in a law firm, and one day I decided that I was either going to kill myself or go into music school." And so, I was, was thinking about this as you were talking, and I wonder if you want to talk about the role that the kind of suffering plays in kind of self-understanding, and whether that's something you've given thought to.
Oh. I don't dwell on it, but when I think about the year leading up to my departure and the year away, when I think about that year, and I'm going to get emotional thinking about it, it was dark. It was incredibly lonely. I felt I felt like I was off the grid of the world and I didn't know how to get back on. And I wonder to this day whether you're supposed to go through that suffering. And it's really interesting. One thing about being in these jobs is you meet a lot of remarkably. You end up you introduce a lot of speakers. You're always introducing speakers, and they're obviously they're people of accomplishment. To a person, almost every remarkably successful person I've ever met has had some dark, lonely period that was started by loss, almost to a person. You scratch the surface a bit, and you're like, there it is, some failure, some. What I remember really feeling, one thing about being a lawyer in this culture, being a lawyer is again, I hinted at it, it's a remarkably prized, powerful position in our culture, and it induces fear. I understood that you could wear that, I could put that on every day. And back to your question about institutional, I was a lawyer at this powerful firm, and I could walk into places, and there was power associated with that. And all of a sudden, it was literally stripped of me, right? And looking back, I mean, I was lucky in that I had a job in which I could save up money to take a year off. I look at that. That's a remarkably privileged position. But I remember literally like waiting for the security guard, like being stripped of that, and waking up the next morning and you couldn't put that on. But that loneliness, that stripping down, and that the exposure of that is really true. But one thing I learned, I remember the second time this happened to me. So I became a college president. I was 42 at my last place, and I was a college president. And I remember walking in the first couple days and thinking I was supposed to act. I had all these memories of college presidents, and I remember thinking I'm supposed to be that person. And I remember. There's someone who actually works here now. His name's Christopher Wells. He worked with me at the PA. And I remember him walking in one time, and I had just given some speech, and he walked in and he says, "You sound like such an ass." By the way, if you can get people like that in your life, cling to those people. And I remember, and I'm like, oh God, you're right. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to put something on again. I'm never going to put something on again. So. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's not true. But anyway. Any more thoughts or concerns?
You said that that it's important to know which places that you find meaning and importance in your life. I was just wondering if you found any meaningful places yet at Colgate or in
I've asked myself that, and one of the great gifts of a dog is they take you for walks, not yet, because I haven't seen a year yet. Campuses have really, like, one thing I know about my job this year is this will sound funny, is that don't say too much because you'll get it wrong, because places have deep histories and deep rhythms, and I don't know the rhythms yet. Like, I don't know what happens when it snows. Oh. I love it. But I remember, and I didn't know this at the time, that the fact that Founders Day convocation happens in the chapel the night before classes begin, I didn't know the power of the space until it was nighttime in that chapel. And I remember going, oh, there's something going on here. And then the inauguration was supposed to be outdoors, and it rained. And we were all so disappointed we're going to pull it inside. Looking back, I'm like, thank God, that belonged. So this is one of the places. My office isn't. I'm like struggling with that. I hate that I am 200 yards off. I do. I think it's really problematic for a president to be off like that. So Claudia in my office always writes coffee on my schedule, which means walk to the coop. I've seen a lot of you, and that I think that's I have to be intentional to break that. I live on the hill, so I don't know off the hill yet. I don't know it. I recognize Broad Street has cultural power that I don't understand. I know that. I don't know how to unpack that. But I know. What's your spaces? Yeah.
The child basement is obviously an important one. Also, the trails
Yeah.
are important to me. And not a lot of people go up there.
I know.
But
I know.
ironically, I'm working on a project to get a map for them, but they're used by so many different people.
Yeah. This basement has its twin, which is the women's center. And I keep wondering why it is that both of them address the campus in a remarkably similar way. They're a little bit below. The two centers are twins, and I don't understand it, but I know that that's true. And weirdly, Ho, the way one enters Ho has power. It like Ho is people. There's something powerful, and so there's something about this campus that people want to go. No, they do. I don't know what it is, but yeah, right. I've not been in the tunnels yet.
Go down there.
Do you want to go?
Yeah.
We'll go. Yeah. I haven't figured it out yet.
They're creepy.
They're creepy, but good creepy.
They're very good during snow time.
Yes.
Do they have power outside of just convenience, or there's something? Creepy is a good word, by the way, because creepy is powerful.
You don't have to go outside in the winter if you're in the science buildings. It's like if you have all classes in like math or science, you don't have to go outside all day.
Is that?
It
Is
feels
that a
like
good?
a secondary world, which is connected to the other one, but
I gotta
ever
f-
so slightly separate.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I'm always afraid there's going to be somebody down there that I don't know.
Where are the ghosts on this campus? West. Ghosts are really Merrill House. Yeah. Where I live is slightly. Do you all know where I live? I live up. I'm trying to live down, but it's problematic in certain ways. I'm trying to break that spell. But where the ghosts are really.
Pretty sure that's one of my apartments.
I worry about the townhouses.
I do too.
I think they're anti-communitarian. I think there's their design, their location is if I had a child who was at Colgate and they want to live in a townhouse, I would think, don't do it. But I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to fix it. Anyway. Yeah.
You've spoken very movingly about both the value of community and of solitude in liberal education and on a campus. And I wonder, A, how you balance that in
Yeah.
your own life, but also how an institution can balance that on campus and in college. I come from Germany. My sense is American colleges are really good at fostering community at the expense of solitude in a degree that keeps bewildering me. So I'm just wondering what your ideas are.
Most people don't know, like if you were going to attend university in Germany, you simply go to Heidelberg. You simply move to the town where the faculties are, right? I mean, the notion of a residential liberal arts college is not, it's not embedded in the continent. It's clearly English or British. It's funny when I think about great campuses, if you would ask me what are the good ones, they do both really well. They provide crossroads and vistas where you see other people, and then places to remove yourself. Really great. And Yale does that fairly well. Notre Dame does it well. Stanford does not. Stanford's too open. I'm always going to go to the physical expression. Courtyards are really important. There's no courtyards on this campus. Now I'm depressed. My favorite spot on this campus, and it was an important moment in a speech I gave for the inauguration, was the classics library right over here. You walk by it, and there's something powerful about. You always see students alone in that space, and students just go there. So there's something powerful about that space. There's something powerful about this space, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. It's not the aesthetics.
No, it's absolutely not. It's nickel and dime aesthetics. That's how we got it here.
Some of the most important places are not overdetermined. They're actually nickeled and dimed. I mean, just they're a little more organic, you know. So, what do you think about that? Yes, because I'm looking because you seem very relaxed here, and I like your boots.
The space has, I've always felt that it has a really special energy. I'm a senior, and this was one of the first places that I came sort of alone. Like, I think when you're a freshman, you sort of fall right into this group of people, whether it be in your dorm or like you have an initial group of people that you feel safe with, and it takes a couple of weeks, I think, before you peel off from that and start doing things on your own. This is one of the first places I came alone, and I remember feeling like really scared to walk in, but the second that I did, I felt comfortable here.
Yeah.
And I think that this space is that for a lot of people. It's just a place where you can absolutely be yourself. That those things that you're talking about, that they're like power dynamics that go with certain groups on campus, those fall away here.
What's really interesting, there's a Architectural Record, which is a really great journal on design, had a group of architects talking about, you know, America's decided it's going to contest the notion of safe spaces. I mean, it's like all over the media, like, you know, the University of Chicago came out about there's no safe spaces. And most architects reacted like, well, that's moronic. Because and back to answer your question, there's always public places and private places and places where you get your smaller group. And there's I don't know whether it's the coming down here that makes you safe. There's power in some of this. Lambda is which is now in the back of the Brian complex is where was I not supposed to say that? I don't know. I think it's a little, but Colgate would do well by having a few more moments that are off squares, and the fact that the Women's Center is probably another nickel and dime space, but it's it's safe. Alana works well because it turns to the grid. If Alana faced that street, it would not be loved. If Alana was just facing the street, it would feel suburban. The fact that some architect incredibly smartly chose to put that 90 degrees off, that's what makes that space. 100%. So, yeah.
How do you feel about personally? Personally, it gives me anxiety.
Just because it's going to fall off the... Yeah, there's something unnerving about that.
Yeah. It's supposed to be like the best view in the sky bridge, but it's just a very like, I'm like nervous talking about it.
You know what this is what I see when I look at that building. It's ostensibly symmetrical with a strong pass-through. I think the pass-through is a way to say we don't impede people, we engage them. But the cupolas, one is off-center and one's on-center, and the building just freaks me out because of that. No, again, like why are you like I don't understand that choice, and so it sits there. I think the building is uncomfortable with itself, right? Yeah. The library, by the way, is too flat. Library should soar. And if you look at the experience at campus, it's just too flat. I want to walk into a library and go, you literally want to be uplifted. Wow, we're really talking about a lot of architecture. I think about it. No, but it's like, I think spaces are really important. They're really, really important. You do go down the library. The entrance on the other side is more successful.
I think a lot of
But you never know what floor you're on.
I think one of the reasons that a space like this in the Women's Center seems so different is because like Colgate made a lot of very strong aesthetic choices, especially with stuff like furniture and like building design. Like the way Frank is designed is very, yeah, the architectural.
Very
made a
postmodern
strong
moment,
statement, right?
yeah.
Right, but I think a space like this, which does not match a lot of the rest of the campus, creates it as a unique space where people feel like they have their own community. Whereas we've already seen that Colgate struggles with a campus community, an overarching idea of a community and trying to make every space seem like part of something that doesn't exist,
Right.
that then ends up being impersonal.
Colgate has never fully resolved its relationship to the beauty of. Everyone says, "Oh, it's beautiful there." Everyone says, "Oh, Colgate, the campus is beautiful." Yet, unlike Middlebury, which is extremely intentional about its view sheds, Middlebury understands that the power of that place is understanding the relationship to the White Mountains and the Green Mountains. Colgate doesn't quite know what to do with its beauty, and there's something about its personality that's afraid of beauty. I firmly believe that there's something in Colgate's DNA that has been resistant to notions of beauty. It's very, very comfortable with stone and power. It's less comfortable with beauty. I want to introduce that to this campus. I've already said this. Anyway, so people have to go. Do I get to sum up?
You're good. You can just.
I can just go with it? Okay. Thank you.